Okay, so Rory McIlroy has abruptly resigned his position on the PGA Tour's Player Advisory Board. And this leaves us wondering, has the PGA Tour finally pushed its sacrificial lamb too far? Remember, it was Rory who referred to himself as a sacrificial lamb when he said, "It's hard for me not to sit up here and feel somewhat like a sacrificial lamb and feeling like I've put myself out there and this is what happens." Rory also went on to say things like, "This is not what I signed up for," and more. And it leaves us wondering what really happens behind these closed doors that might have put Rory to finally go over that edge and stop being the unofficial spokesperson for the PGA Tour. There's other factors involved here as well, and we can only speculate until we hear a little bit more of a direct announcement from Rory, which we may never get. But even keep in mind, remaining on that PGA Tour Players Advisory Board are guys like Patrick Cantlay, who we saw all in the news this week that Rory had some choice words for. Maybe it's something having to do with Patrick being on that board that might have pushed him a little bit too far. But I think there may even be something deeper here. The other big announcement that the PGA Tour made yesterday is that under the agreement, once this framework announcement goes through and the new organization is created, the PGA Tour is indicating that players are going to have more of an equity ownership in the PGA Tour. And this leaves me wondering, is this the PGA Tour's attempt to finally have a more fair, equitable profit sharing with the players? Remember, there's a lot of players, and headed up primarily by Phil Mickelson, who 2 years ago, as started these rumblings of this move to LIV, had a lot of grievances with the way that the PGA Tour had made money and believing that that was not fully shared with the players. So is this the PGA Tour's somewhat acknowledgement of that and their attempt now to give some of that equity and some of that ownership to the players? Or is this the PGA Tour effectively bribing a few holdouts to finally get on board with this deal? Remember, there's a lot of players throughout the years throughout this year who've used words like feeling betrayed and humiliated by the way that the PGA Tour went about this announcement to merge with LIV. And I truly believe that there's a lot of those players that are probably gumming up the works and holding out in any type of way of moving forward with this deal. We've seen it from other player advisory board members. We heard Davis Love talking about this recently, saying that doesn't really see the framework getting done by that day. And I think a large part of that might be many of these PGA Tour players who felt a little bit betrayed and are now very hesitant to sign on to any deal that has a huge investment from the PIF. So this makes me wonder, was this decision to have more of an ownership role by the PGA Tour players something to get a few final holdouts over the line? And is that effectively a big reason why Rory is now leaving the PGA Tour Policy Advisory Board? Now, keep in mind another thing that Rory has said in the past, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's said something to the effect of he would rather retire than play under the LIV flag. And is there some component of this agreement that's being fleshed out that would require PGA Tour players to play in some sort of LIV events? Is that something that kind of has pushed Rory too far and caused him to step away from it? We can only speculate at this moment, but I think the biggest takeaway here was the fact that the PGA Tour was wholly and solidly against LIV until it wasn't. And the manner in which this was done behind closed doors and so abruptly agreed upon to move forward with this merger for LIV, I think what that effectively did was it left some of the PGA Tour's biggest champions in a position of effectively no win. And again, feeling very betrayed. If you think about a guy like Rory McIlroy, whether you agree with his position to defend the PGA Tour or not, I think we can all have a bit of sympathy for the fact that here was a guy who chose a side, stuck his neck out for that side, became effectively the unofficial spokesperson for the PGA Tour, and stuck his neck out pretty far, only to be surprised when the PGA Tour made a 180, something that he's admitted to not really being aware of any of those discussions, and then effectively treat him as a sacrificial lamb. So now what is ahead for Rory is really the question. Some have pointed out that this is now Rory's time where he can kind of put this headache behind him and just focus on golf and focus on playing golf again. But regardless, I think one thing that we can definitely all see from this is that the PGA Tour has definitely lost its loudest player spokesperson. And whether they wanted that player spokesperson at this point or not, it's this whole other thing. But the PGA Tour has done of course, the usual of telling they respect his decision and wish him well. And there was all types of things of citing, family and other commitments and just the time element that was involved with being on the PGA Tour Player Advisory Board. But full well knowing the type of person that Rory is, I can't imagine that he would resign his position ahead of the term ending, which ends just the end of next year. He could have just let that term run out. If Rory went so far as to resign his position, I guarantee there's more bad blood there than what's being indicated on the surface. So it remains to be seen, but the question really is are some of these small announcements that are trickling out, like yesterday's announcement about the players having that equitable share, is there something in there that was just too far for Rory? It was just too much? Or is it some sort of other collaboration with LIV that he just couldn't get on board for? Or potentially even some infighting with some of the other policy board members like Patrick Cantlay, who we know he's shared his frustrations about. So there's a lot to kind of still learn here and unfold as we go. But regardless, I think one thing is definitely clear, and that's the fact that Rory did not leave that position simply to have more free time with his family. There was something else deeper in it, and I think as we move closer and closer to that deadline of December 31st, we're going to find out what that was.